Welcome back to Our Africa. Now, Breaking Borders is an initiative that encourages the youth to participate on issues to do with leadership, issues to do with entrepreneurship. It also looks at promoting tourism between African countries. With many of our youth realizing the value of exploring Africa and seeing the various monuments and discovering our rich history, Breaking Borders was born through Paul Mojaji, an award-winning dancer who's traveled extensively across the globe and in Africa.
My name is Paul Mojaji. I'm a dancer, choreographer, philanthropist, young entrepreneur, and I'm passionate about Africa.
Paul with his team have ventured to 10 African countries, exploring different cultures, sharing experiences, and making new friends on the continent.
Breaking Down Borders is a youth platform, basically. It seeks to unite and bring together some of Africa's brightest young minds in Africa for the betterment of Africa. So in short, it's basically a youth platform. Well, as one of the founders of the initiative, my role is to basically instigate the collaborations that are possible for young people within the continent. So the project actually was inspired by my travels as part of the Young African Leaders Initiative, which saw about 500 of us young people converge in the USA in 2015. And one of the things that was really quite iconic for me from that whole experience was that a lot of young Africans have so many amazing technologies and so many amazing achievements, and yet hardly ever get the opportunity to have platforms within the African continent to get together, to interchange, to trade across borders. So as a young person, my role is to basically, drive the movement from the front.
A documentary journaling their journey is also on the cards, just to help us and the rest of the world to know more about the motherland.
It has been an absolutely incredible journey to date. We've traveled across 10 African countries in the past year, just basically looking to collaborate with young people and looking to create networks. And the highlight of the initiative in this 1 year was a summit in Africa Youth Month, Africa Month rather. A summit that saw about 60 young people from 15 African countries converge in South Africa to network, to basically discuss issues of socioeconomic development, and to talk about how young people can really begin to take ownership of the African economy. So as you can imagine, traveling across 10 African countries in a year is quite a mammoth experience. And one of the things that we're passionate about is to promote Africa to young Africans. A lot of the times young people in Africa know so much about the West and about Europe than they actually know about their very own continent. And when we look at the over 1 billion population that resides in Africa, we see a potential for a market that in more ways than one is not explored by Africans. So we hope that this documentary will expose our audience to the wealth of opportunities and places and spaces and people that make part of our beautiful continent. So in one, we hope to promote tourism, but also to, in some way, inspire young entrepreneurs to think beyond their borders.
As South Africans, however, we tend to have a misconception about traveling the continent.
I suppose one of the biggest misconceptions South Africans have about Africa is that it's a dark continent, so to speak. People don't think of Africa as the next frontier in as far as exploring markets. So we always think of trading with other sort of outside of the continent countries more than we actually think of economic opportunities that might be available within the continent. And having explored the continent, one is able to realize that there's a lot more development in the continent from an infrastructural point of view, to education, to just manufacturing. There's so many countries that we could really be taking advantage of and trading with, and even potentially creating ties with, economic ties with, that we potentially don't. I think there's a strength to Africa that a lot of South Africans haven't yet tapped into, and that in more ways than one ill-informed about. You know, the most interesting thing about the experience we've had is that, like South Africa, all the countries we've been to have different demographics and have different rural and urban spaces. So I don't think there's one single country that we've been to where we're disappointed with the level of infrastructure within that country. I mean, Tanzania is definitely one that I think tops our minds, because how often do you go to a coastal city, with Dar es Salaam being an example here, where you have an urban dwelling, you know, you have an economic hub of a country right in a coastal area, you know. So from an infrastructural point of view to just the economic activity of the city was really one that was really dynamic. It felt like we were really in New York, right here in Africa.
Breaking Borders aims to bring unity, more especially on the youth, with more trips lined up and another youth summit on the cards.
You know, there's a lot of amazing developments that have come from this initiative. First of all, when we started to go on the tour, we had not anticipated that it could lead to a summit being a platform that would, you know, derive from the tour. And we're excited that, you know, the summit itself was an evolution or development of young people themselves that requested that, you know what, as much as we appreciate these like country to country sort of bilateral type of connections, we believe that the only way to move Africa forward is to really expand the conversation and to expand the network to the whole of Africa. So what we see moving forward, coming from this initiative, is more of touring opportunities where young people across countries are visiting each other. We are seeing a platform of, we are seeing the Breaking Down Borders Africa Youth Summit becoming an annual program that will allow young people to come together and not only conversate but also trade. Because in the future we see an Africa Youth exhibition that will see young people bring some of their best creations and innovations under one hub to market to one another, so we can really begin to trade.
As Africans, we need to understand that unity is strength and that division brings weakness. Colonialism in Africa has done a good job of dividing us, making us think that we are not one. In fact, it has robbed us of learning from each other. It is up to us as Africans to embrace one another and break these borders that bring division, as we have some really good stories to tell. Exploring the continent, sharing our ideas and our knowledge is one way that we can bring unity and build one another.
Yeah, I think for me, my first major achievement, if you like, was when I paid Lobola. Because I think, you know, from a sociological standpoint, I felt that I had built a bridge. Because the Lobola ceremony, I had to write a letter. You know, it was very tedious. It wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't a joke. You know, at first I thought, oh, maybe I'll just get married, you know, like the Western way, you know, propose. But it was a process, and, you know, it humbles you. So, and I was lucky to be the first, probably the only ever Nigerian in this country to have the High Commissioner and the Consul General negotiate my Lobola in a place called Galaxy. So that was important for me. So I felt that I had built bridges with the locals and I had gone through a rite of passage. And of course, going beyond that, when I was able to, when I got into Old Mutual, I almost got fired within 2-3 days because there was a 4-page script that we needed to, they talked about being unconsciously competent. So we needed to master the script. And I was playing around with the script and I almost got fired. So that script, I'll never forget the script. And I thought that was a major achievement for me, in being able to sit with my clients and be able to tell them about the products and the company. And then, of course, 2 years down the line, I was able to become top of the country. I got the biggest transaction, but for 1 week, which for a black person in 2006, it took me 3 months to close the deal. I got instructions on the 21st or 22nd of March, 2006, and I only closed the deal in July. And it was a massive deal, 31 executives, preferred compensation, in a life wrapper. It was a retention strategy that the company wanted to keep its top executives. And that made me top of the country, and the business was a 5-year deal. And that put me out there, and everybody in the company knew me. And even though I didn't stay in the company for long, that was a really big success for me.
We do, however, need to change the negative perceptions that we have about our brothers and sisters as a majority to bring positive contributions to our country.
It's quite sad. The challenge we face is that we all painted with the same brush. It's all about people running away from war, people coming to look for green pastures, which in fact there's nothing wrong with that. People have to find a place of safety. And I have to say, South Africa is a blessed country in Africa. It's a hope of Africa. What we just have to do is to reach a point as Africans where we start seeing each other as opportunity instead of threat. This is where we have the major difference between us Africans and the non-Africans when it comes to their counterparts. They look at them as extra hands to help them to join forces and for great achievement. Yet we're still sitting with the mentality of looking at other fellow Africans as threat.
A lot of work lies ahead in order for us to break these borders. And that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Our Africa. From myself, Audrey Chimwanda, and the team, let's continue to make Africa great.